All right, welcome everybody to Cardiovascular Medicine Grand Rounds. It's a great honor to me to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Victor Strecher, who's a professor at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. Vic Strecher is a visionary leader and expert in the field of behavioral change, digital communication, and well-being. Dr. Strecher received his master in public health and doctorate from the University of Michigan. In 1995, Vic founded the University of Michigan Center for Health Communication Research. In 1997, he founded Health Media, a digital health coaching company that was eventually sold to Johnson & Johnson. And more recently, he created Kumanu, a digital platform designed to help individuals live more intentionally and purposefully. He has received multiple NIH grants and has published over 140 scientific articles. Vic and the organizations he founded have won numerous national and international awards, including the Smithsonian Award, the Health Evolution Partners Innovation in Healthcare Award, and the National Business Coalition on Health Mercury Award. In 2010, he was named the Innovator of the Year at the University of Michigan. His 2009 TED Med presentation has been cited by MPH Online as one of the top TED Talks on public health. In 2020, his free open online course, Finding Purpose and Meaning in Life, was rated 4th best online course in the world by Inc. magazine. His behavioral neuroscience and epigenetic research, 2 books, 4 TED Talks, 2 massive open online courses, and all focused on the importance of developing and maintaining strong core values, intentionality, and purpose in life. He will be speaking today about a root cause for behavior change and well-being. Please help me welcome Dr. Strecher.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you so much. Good. All right. So thank you so much for being here. Just a couple of things before we start, some disclosures. I am the founder of this company called Kumanu. Kumanu is a digital well-being company that uses purpose as driving force or basis for behavior change, well-being in general. I'm not going to be talking about the application we built for them at all. I will be referring to some research that we do with the Harris poll. And this is just the national poll that we do twice to 3 times a year. I'll be showing some of those data. Those data are not published in a scientific journal, but I'll try to warn you about that beforehand. And then I'm also an investor in 23andMe. I won't be talking about genes, but just thought you might want to know that I'm a bad investor since they're worth about a penny. So what's a purpose in life? I'm a big jazz fan, a big music fan. Dexter Gordon, when asked what's his purpose in life, he said to be the tenor saxophonist. And in my mind, he was. He's an amazing tenor saxophonist. Samuel Barber, another hero of mine in composition, when he is 9 years old, he reported to his mother, "My purpose in my life is to be a composer." He did that when he was 9 years old. He added this little piece to his mom, "Don't ask me to try to forget this unpleasant thing and go play football, please." So people have different purposes in life at different ages. This is actually a purpose from Jason Gaze. When he was 6 years old, he had cancer, and he decided to write my book for kids with cancer. And so this is his purpose, to be a doctor who takes care of kids with cancer. So when they say, Dr. Jason, I get emotional even talking about this. Sometimes I get so scared I'm going to die. Or you don't know how weird it is to be the only bald kid in your whole school. I can say, oh, yes, I do. When I was a little boy, I had cancer too, and look at all my hair now. Someday your hair will grow back too. Now imagine having a purpose like that. He got through, he survived his cancer, he became a golf professional. He never became a doctor, which is another part of having a purpose. You don't have to maintain the same purpose your whole life. You're not stuck with that purpose or committed to it. Anytime you need a Hallmark card, probably. You know, like if you graduate, if you get married, if you get a divorce, if you lose a loved one, if you retire, if you get a new job, all those times might be times where you might start considering, getting a purpose in your life. Now, your previous Grand Rounds speaker was Mark Johnson. He's a good friend. He actually did both of my retinal detachments, so I owe him my sight, literally. But we've become good friends, and he read one of my books, Life on Purpose, and he decided to send me this fairly recently, and I asked him if I could use this in the talk, and he said, of course. So said first, since you seem to like to hear other people's purposes, which I do, I'm very annoying. If I'm like in an Uber or something, I'll go to the Uber driver, do you have a purpose in your life? And it's amazing. So often they'll point to a picture of a child or a wife or parents or something right on their dashboard and say, this is my purpose. This is why I work 10 hours a day, 6 days a week or more. So I like to ask people of all walks of life what their purpose is. But this to me is one of the best purposes I've ever seen. And I've seen, and we collect with our Harris poll, tens of thousands of people's purposes. We ask, do you have a purpose in your life? By the way, 60% of people can write that down. 40% say, no, I don't have any purpose. But 60% can say that. But look at Mark's here just for a second. To live each day in a state of presence from love rather than fear. So he's giving himself a mindset to begin with so that I can most effectively serve my family unselfishly, treat my patients with caring and compassion, serve my colleagues and staff with wisdom and humility, teach others with generosity and encouragement, contribute knowledge and perspective to my specialty, lift the disadvantaged in my community throughout the world. Notice the different domains of that person's purpose, of Mark's purpose. He's got a community purpose. He has a work purpose. His work purpose extends to both being a leader, a colleague, as well as a physician for his patients. Pretty amazing. And to serve his family. He is a servant leader, a true servant leader, and that's why I like him so much. Now, here's the other really key thing, is in order to have this big, hairy-ass purpose, oh, sorry, we're recording that, but anyway, in order to have this big purpose, he needs to take care of himself. I'm in the School of Public Health, and that's my primary responsibility, to help people, take care of themselves so we prevent disease and prevent death. So people have some sort of future orientation of themselves and say, oh, I might be at risk for this, so I better get a COVID shot or quit smoking or get a mammogram or whatever those things are. I better take care of myself. What's key about a purpose is that if it is like a purpose of this strength, he's got to take care of himself. I hope that's making sense so far. This may be one of the mechanisms underlying why people who have purpose do so well physically down the road. This is what I mean by a purpose: a self-organizing framework for channeling energy and resources toward meaningful goals. Now here, of course, I'm not using energy in a physics term. I'm using energy in terms of whether you feel vital and energized at certain times, but that does seem to be something that ATP phosphorylates to create as well. It does seem to, that we do need that kind of energy, right? So this is what I mean, and I'm going to get into some detail about it. First, my purpose, and this is the most important document of my life. It's right in my office at home. It's my office at work. I'm here to inquire about nature. I'm here to provide support and love for my family, friends, and community. I strive to create new approaches to health and well-being, and to be a teacher to my students, treating them as if they're my own children. I'm here to inspire others to join the dance floor of life and to embrace joy through this journey. In other words, not being a wallflower, like in 8th grade, you're at a sock hop, and, I was always a wallflower, of course, but you're kind of waiting for someone to ask you to dance, right? And then you think, oh, I guess, if they wanted me to dance, they would have asked me. And they're thinking exactly the same thing, maybe. Just get out on the friggin' dance floor. And maybe you're not even dancing with somebody else. Maybe you're dancing with yourself. Whatever that is, that's what I mean by being on the dance floor, really living life as if it may come to an end, which, by the way, it does. So often we don't think about that. But when we think about our own mortality, write that down, we end up starting to think more about our purpose in life. By the way, if you are able to write your purpose down, I'm not going to ask you to do that right now or for a show of hands, but if you were able to write a purpose, you're far less likely also to be depressed. And this comes from our Harris Poll survey. And we've done this 7 times with 2,000 people each time. We ask if they can write their purpose down. And if you can write your purpose, even if it's some sort of little hallmarky purpose, like, oh, I want to do good in the world, period, you're less likely to be depressed. And that's statistically controlling for age, gender, income, and education. So we're trying to make it go away, and we cannot make that go away. So when I think about this purpose in my own life, I'll just pick on myself for a second. To be a family man, to be a visionary leader, to be a seeker of truth, to be a friend, a teacher, a supporter of the arts, globally engaged, to be fun-loving. I call these my be goals. I'm here to be those things. Now, this is not my model. This is part of a model that's been around. It's called the self-regulatory model. Just like a refrigerator needs to self-regulate when your partner opens the door and leaves it open, it starts, it's going to start kicking out colder air. This is a self-regulatory model that requires feedback, but there are some core elements of it. And the most core element are my be goals. I'm here to be these things. So this is something you might want to think about in your own life. You might want to think about in other people's lives. From that, I need to be positive, to be a visionary leader. To be a family man, I need to be calm. I have 2 93-year-old parents, for example. To be a seeker of truth, I need to be a broad thinker. To be a teacher, I need to be energetic. I have hundreds of students, et cetera. I could go on, and I call these do goals. There are things I need to do. This is simply a hierarchical goal set that helps me organize my goals according to what I most deeply value. That's what I'm talking about here. Pretty straightforward. Now, in order to do those things like being calm, very often as a behavioral scientist, I'm asked, well, how can I calm down more? Or how could I manage my weight better? Or how could I, do X, Y, or Z? Those are things that I could give them 200 different kinds of meditations for example. But that's not what I'm looking for. And typically, rather than saying, I have a great loving kindness meditation for you, I say, why do you want to be calm? So the why becomes really important in having a purpose. As Friedrich Nietzsche said, he who has a why can manage almost any how. And so that's what we're talking about here. If I have overall this why, and I'm focused on my be goals, and you as a clinician dealing with a person who might need to really adhere to their medication better, for example, or do many other things, if they have a why for that, they'll be much more likely to manage the how of that whole system. I hope that's making sense so far. Both of those are important, but so often we as experts in a certain area, if somebody says, hey, how do I manage my stress? Let me tell you how to do that. How do I work out better? Let me tell you how to do that. You want to manage some weight? Let me tell you how to do that. As opposed to why do you want to do it to begin with? From that why, then all of the hows will stick further, will stick more, okay? So you won't be dealing with the same kind of relapse rates if you can start with that why. Now, how do you find a why? You're a clinician, right? How do you pick out a why in somebody? Well, we'll talk about that because that's key. But even in your own mind, could you build something like this in your own mind? What would my be goals be? And from that, how could I manage my do goals and my act goals? So again, a purpose is a self-organizing framework. Also notice that these arrows don't go out into things like what Kim Kardashian is wearing on social media. And yet that's what a lot of people focus attention on, right? So there are many things my students, many things your patients, many things you yourselves focus on, certainly I do as well, that may not be part of this purpose. And you have to ask yourself, is that something I really want to be devoting my limited resource for, called energy, in order to focus on that, if that's making sense? So what this does is help you organize what to focus your attention on in your life, but also what to defocus your attention on in your life. Here's an example. These are real examples from real people who I know who have, throughout the years, I've worked with them on their purpose. This is a very religious woman, and she wanted to work in sub-Saharan Africa. Her purpose to be an empathetic healer and helper to the sick and dying and to serve God. Here would be her B goals in that case, to serve God. How is she going to serve God? She wants to stay in touch with God. How is she going to do that? She'll pray every day. She also wants to be a helper and healer. How's she going to do that? She needs energy, especially in sub-Saharan Africa where she's working. And how to do that? She wants to sleep well and she wants to eat well. Those two things. She also needs greater empathy. She wanted to focus on being more empathetic, so she started working on her listening skills. So you see how that kind of works. This is another person I know, a scientist who is a woman. Her purpose to be a strong woman and a great scientist and to be a loving partner. So what would be her B goals? To be a strong woman. To do that, she wants to be physically strong, so she drinks at least 6 glasses of water a day, and she is now a kickboxer. She's very badass. She also, to be a scientist, scientists, it's hard to be a scientist because you think, oh, this isn't so hard, but you need 2 parts of the brain working at the same time to be a really good scientist. One is to be really super disciplined. But the other, oddly enough, because I know a lot of really disciplined people who are not great scientists, but the great scientists also have this very open mind and are very, very curious. And if they have both, and those are 2 different parts of the brain that, if they're like muscles, you have to work out both of those muscles a lot. That turns people into really great scientists, in my experience anyway. There are a lot of very open-minded people who aren't very disciplined, and they tend not to be great scientists either. So anyway, in my mind, those are both important. So she engages in time management and she meditates every day. So these are just some examples. And notice every one of these are different because you are all different. Nobody's average. You would end up doing things yourself based on your own B goals, and then build do goals around that, build action goals around that. So what if we had a pill that was a purpose pill? Just a thought experiment for now. If we could just take a pill that said, I'm going to have a better purpose, a stronger sense of purpose. Let's go to like a hypertension medication, just for example, since we're in the Cardiovascular Center. What would you do if you're trying to build a new blood pressure drug? Well, first of all, in the early days, people needed to define what blood pressure was, right? So here's a simple definition: the pressure exerted by blood against the walls of blood vessels. You would also then want to figure out how to measure it. So early versions of, blood pressure cuffs, sphygmomanometers, I still can't say that, and starting to monitor and measure people's blood pressure would be the next thing to do. You want to be able to measure things. You also want to study mechanisms. And early on, people had many different hypotheses of mechanisms for how blood pressure really operated. So you could start looking at that. Then you might want to look at morbidity and mortality. How about people with different levels of blood pressure and who dies and when do they die? When do they get sick? Then you might even try intervening. Let's try a particular kind of drug or medication, and let's try it in, I'm just throwing this up on the right. This is just eye candy, but just showing, this is the kind of randomized trial you would probably be doing when starting to study this. You might then say, well, wow, there are different mechanisms for different drugs, and start testing that out. You may go further and say, okay, now let's try this new drug and see if we can actually prevent disease, coronary heart disease, for example, with this new drug. You start doing that, and then you build meta-analyses and you put that together. Then you might go, okay, now let's look at this on a whole population level. Now that we have our blood pressure drug, and we have, in fact, an array of blood pressure medications, let's see how many people are aware of their hypertension status, how many people are in treatment, how many people are being controlled. You see, so you're gradually moving from that definitional stage all the way to population, and then you can finally start studying mortality, and bingo, wow, nice, good job, guys. So you can see what's going on, but it's a step-by-step process. Where are we if we were building a purpose pill? Well, let's talk about that for a second. So do we have a definition of purpose? Well, we just talked about one. A self-organizing framework for channeling energy and resources toward meaningful goals that you have. How about a measurement? How do we measure purpose? It's kind of an amorphous thing, isn't it? It's not like the pressure exerted against your blood vessels, right? So here is a way that we might do it. I have a sense of direction and purpose in my life. Some people wander aimlessly through life. I'm not one of them. And you can keep going. And if you have more than one measure there, you're starting to reduce error variance. And you can assemble this and maybe get fancy and do a factor analysis and load each item. Whatever that is, though, you're putting together a measure. And there are 3 or 4 really good measures that are useful, have some predictive validity to this amorphous concept, this thing you really can't touch, like purpose. And if you're thinking, yeah, this, how can you call that science? This is too soft. Well, people said the same thing about stress in the past, or many other things like social support. And you guys, more than anyone, knows that about stress and the importance of stress and its relevance on heart disease. So yes, we start with these things. This has gone off the deep end, though, when we're talking about this existential construct called purpose in life. But we can measure it. What are the mechanisms? I want to talk about 3. So a psychological mechanism, a behavioral, and a biological mechanism, just to show you how we do research and some of my research doing this. One mechanism is we all have stress every day. All of us do. We all know that, right? Purpose seems to buffer the impact of stressors. So let me give you the classic example of that. We call that resilience, by the way. And the classic example is Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Anyone aware of this book? Okay, very powerful book. Viktor Frankl is a physician, became the physician in 3 concentration camps. He is a prisoner himself. He lost his entire family in the concentration camps, but he ended up being an observer. He was curious, very curious person. He used both sides of his brain for sure, very disciplined person, started writing this down whenever possible, and found that basically, going through these camps, this was his conclusion in Man's Search for Meaning. Woe to him who saw no more sense in his life, no aim, no purpose, and therefore no point in carrying on. He was soon lost. And he studied this, asking the question, do people in concentration camps, if they're not murdered outright, do they get sick and then they lose their purpose and then they die? Or do they lose their purpose and then they get sick and die? And he found the latter was more likely the case. People kind of gave up. They lost their purpose, lost their direction, no longer, entropy started occurring, and there's no reverse entropic process, like having a purpose in your life to make things more organized. They become disorganized and they lose their lives through that. Interesting. Here's a neat study that kind of reflects that. This is an experiment that was done with college students where they gave one group of college students a backpack that had 25 pounds of dead weight in it. In fact, they told these students, you were carrying 25 pounds of dead weight. It was just dumbbells and, just heavy stuff inside the backpack. The second group, they put this electric fan in along with the 25 pounds. It was just a light electric fan that made a whirring noise. And they said, you are carrying really important scientific equipment in your backpack. I mean, this is super important to this study, what you're carrying. Not only is it important to this study, but it's important to science. And it's important to humankind. This is really, what you're doing is incredibly important. And then they had this other group not carrying any backpack. So one group was basically thinking, okay, I've got a purpose and a heavy backpack. Another group saying, well, I have no purpose in carrying this heavy backpack. And the third group probably saying, I must be in a control group. I don't know. They blindfolded them and they walked them over to a stairwell that had a ramp on it. The ramp was 14.5 degrees. They measured that. They taught them beforehand about degrees and how to measure that, going up and down ramps and things. And this is called a ramp study. Psychologists use this a lot, and it's to measure resilience. Now, on average, typically in ramp studies, control conditions double the angle of the ramp in their estimate. They double it. So that says something in and of itself, doesn't it? Like people are going up, even after training, they go, oh, this is really hard, right? So that's what people do. And sure enough, in this study, 31% degrees was the estimate on average of the group of students in the control condition. Not carrying anything, they literally are doubling the ramp angle in their mind, okay? Make sense so far? Use that as the base, 31%. Now let's look at the people who are carrying the heavy backpack of no purpose. Carrying this backpack, it doesn't have any purpose. 42 degrees, they estimate. How about the backpack that has the quote scientific equipment they think is very purposeful? How do they estimate the ramp? As if they weren't carrying a backpack. Now, I see nodding of heads because I know that you have gone through times that are very stressful, but also very purposeful. When we ask people about post-traumatic growth, we ask this simple question: when is the time in your life when you grew the most? Typically, it's at a time that was very high stress, but also you had a very strong purpose to manage that. When that happens, you actually grow. But also, interestingly, when that happens, you don't perceive the stress nearly as much. So you are more resilient. So this is a psychological mechanism. We should be grateful for having this guy, Ethan Cross, in the psychology department. He runs the Emotion and Self-Control Laboratory. Isn't that a great laboratory to run? Emotion and Self-Control. And he wrote this amazing book I'm going to highly recommend called Chatter. The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters, How to Harness It. Ethan and I and some other researchers took a look at his 16 top coping strategies that are used by people to manage their stress. And this is the article that we recently published on this. But if you look at the bottom, you see on the far left, some people drink alcohol when they're stressed out. Some people eat a lot. Some people hide their anxiety. Some people vent. Some people distract themselves. Other people see a big picture, see a silver lining. No, this won't last. Turn to a religion or family ritual. Spend time outside in nature. Find humor in things. Now, I ordered these in accordance with their correlation with their sense of purpose in life. That making sense? So in other words, on the left, the people drinking alcohol were least likely to have a strong purpose in their lives, whereas the people on the right, seeing a big picture, finding a silver lining, knowing this won't last, tended to have the strongest purpose in life. And I just ordered it according to the coping strategies that were purpose associated. Now, also, I wanted to look at how well they were managing their emotions. Emotional regulation is really an important concept, especially among leaders. I mean, it's so important. Having met and interacted, worked with Nobel Prize winners and other people, and you guys work with amazing scientists a lot, don't you sometimes want to go, geez, you're an amazing scientist, but if you just could manage your emotions, you'd go so much further. It's really incredible. A lot of people are that way. So, there's a friend of mine in the business school. He has a son who is 5 and going to Montessori school, and he and his son were getting into it. They were getting really upset at each other, and they started literally almost yelling at each other. This professor friend of mine told me, and he said, suddenly my son, who had just gotten back from Montessori school, said, Dad, I'm going to manage my own weather. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I'm very stormy right now, but I'm going to be calm and clear and sunny. And just did. Just simply went, boom, like this. He had this agency to be able to just say, I can manage my own emotions. I wish most of our senior leaders could do that. I mean, really, in working with amazing scientists, amazing leaders, wouldn't it be great if those people, or my colleagues, if they could manage their own emotion like a 5-year-old having gone to Montessori school? So it turns out, though, that people with stronger purpose use these coping strategies on the right, and it maps really well to that type of emotional self-regulation. So this is one reason why people with strong purpose are less depressed. They're happier people in general. They're calmer people. They're less anxious. And we use all the standard, like the GAD-7 for anxiety. So it does really seem to buffer the impact of stress, having a strong purpose. Pathway 2, behavior. People with strong purpose, and I've alluded to this before, just like in Mark Johnson's Purpose in Life, they tend to take better care of themselves. Why? Because they have a purpose, not because they necessarily want to live to be 120 or 150, but because they have this big, hairy purpose. And in changing their behavior, they end up improving their health outcomes and they live longer. On average, people with stronger purpose live longer than people with a weak purpose. We'll get to that in a second. But let's just examine this mechanism for a second. So we published a while back a study that showed in PNAS that showed that people with a stronger purpose were more likely to get cholesterol testing, more likely to get a colonoscopy, a mammogram, a pap smear, a prostate exam, and many, many other things. They also spent fewer nights in the hospital. And these risk ratios are very big, and we tried to control this away. We controlled for the kitchen sink: age, race, gender, income, education, health status, health behaviors. You could not make this go away. These things, screening behaviors, just came out and consistently were very, very strong. We found also people with strong purpose less likely to use illicit drugs. They're more likely to get COVID vaccines. Again, why? Because they need to take care of themselves because they have a purpose. This is Emily Falk. She used to work in our lab. She's a neuroscientist and psychologist. She now runs her own lab at the University of Pennsylvania. We did this study that started with people who were overweight. And these are adults throughout the Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti area. We put an ad in the paper saying, are you overweight and sedentary? In other words, are not working out. So we wanted essentially couch potatoes. We were soliciting couch potatoes for this. We had no problem, by the way. I guess there are a lot of them. So we solicited them, and then we randomized them into two groups. In one group, we had them think about their purpose. We put them in an MRI. We had one group think about their purposeful core values. What matters most to you in your life? What are those things, those B goals, those B values that we're talking about? The other group, we had them think about like daily routine activities, nothing related to their purposeful core values. We then told them, while they're in MRI, you really need to work out. You need to start becoming more physically active, less sedentary. And if you don't, you could die. So what we're trying to do there is scare the crap out of them. It's standard, you know, it's what we do. Then what we did, and we're doing this in MRI, so we're monitoring their brain. We clamp their head down, we tell them all these things, we have them think about all these things while they're in MRI, and then we give everybody a smartphone app that includes, and this has nothing to do with my Kumanu app, but this is just a smartphone app we used in 2015 that every morning reminds them of their purposeful core values, but also tells them how to work out more. Here's some skills, here's some things to think about when you're working out. The other group, we just gave them the skills in the app. Making sense so far? Okay, in other words, one group, we're really not talking about their purpose or purposeful core values. The other, we're really talking about it and reminding them of that. We also then gave them all an accelerometer to monitor their steps for a month. And the first thing we wanted to do is see whether this part of the brain called the ventral medial prefrontal cortex got more active in the group thinking more about their purpose. This part of the brain relates to values-based decision-making, just what we've been talking about, you know, those B goals. It also relates to future orientation. I'm thinking about my possible selves in the future. I can't imagine anything more relevant in public health. I'm a professor in public health. We want people thinking about their future. And then it also relates to amygdala regulation, actually down-regulation. So when our amygdala, which is our very ancient part of our brain, our reptilian brain, gets very active, you know, that's associated with fear, it's associated with aggression. You know, many people, even neuroscientists, wrote articles about how COVID hijacked our amygdala. You can write about how election candidates hijack our amygdala, et cetera. And when that happens, you stop thinking up here. Your prefrontal cortex, your decision-making, very modern part of the brain stops being active, gets less blood flow. So we want to treat this almost like a muscle. We want it to say, this part of the brain, we want to work out a little bit, get more active. Making sense? So as we're in the scanner, when people are in the scanner, we've got one group thinking more about their purpose, their purposeful core values. So here's what happened. First of all, the people in that purpose condition indeed did have more activation in this ventral medial prefrontal cortex. We've also found in subsequent studies less activation in the amygdala. But then, importantly, we found that the people who are thinking about their purposeful core values, and in the group that reminded them of their purposeful core values every day through the smartphone, they reduced their sedentary activity by a lot. And in fact, the more blood flow that went here, the steeper that green line. So this is what we published in PNAS. It's trying to get at a mechanism. What's happening in the brain when you're starting to think more purposefully? Is this making sense so far? Okay. Now, the final pathway is biological. So, and this is the part that we know least about, like why, is there a physiological response to having a purpose? This is a study that we just published this last year, working with people at Harvard, at UCLA, and at the University of British Columbia, where we were looking at epigenetic age and epigenetic clocks. If you're not familiar with that, we have a genome, and we're all taught that DNA genome doesn't really change all that much, really kind of like a hard drive. But on top of that, now layering over it is almost like a vinyl record. It's actually methyl molecules, but it is this vinyl record that can get worn down. And what's interesting, and what I was certainly never taught in high school or college, is that some elements of our epigenome are heritable, very likely. And I won't get into that. That's a whole nother, lecture, but very interesting how our epigenome is very, it can be inherited. And it's very susceptible to things like food insecurities or housing insecurities, poverty, a lot of things like that. So we wanted to find out whether purpose was associated with our epigenome. And there are there are 14 prominent epigenetic clocks that have been developed. And this is just basically a patterning of our epigenome. And what we found here is older adults with stronger purpose in life. This is all a study of all older adults, by the way, show younger DNA methylation, epigenetic age acceleration. Results suggest new opportunities to reduce biological age acceleration by enhancing purpose and its behavioral sequelae. In other words, people with a strong purpose have longer epigenetic clocks. That to me is just interesting, and nobody really knows why. Although when we do start trying to get rid of this effect, we find that the place that the effect drops the most is when we look at their health behaviors. So that's suggesting that people with strong purpose take better care of themselves, and that those health behaviors actually enhance their epigenetic clock. I hope that's making sense, but this is still really early in understanding. Do you see a difference in age between these two? Who do you think is the younger? Who thinks the one on the left? Yeah, okay, fine. It's actually a trick question because this is a composite of 10 identical twins, each one. And so if you're an identical twin and you go through life, after a while, you start looking differently. Why? Because life is different for the two people, even if you have the same genome. And in fact, in a group of nurses who are the judges here, the nurses judge this person to be 64 and this person to be 74. So these people on the right seem to be different. Is there anything else different? Yes, the length of their telomeres and the amount of telomerase in their blood system. So this is called the telomere effect. The person who worked on this the most and won the Nobel Prize in medicine for this was Elizabeth Blackburn on the left. She's working with Alyssa Epel, one of the world's experts on resilience, and they wrote this book together. But they also wanted to study the impact of changing one's purpose in life on your telomerase. Telomerase is the fuel or enzyme for the ends of our chromosomes, that almost like the aglets of our shoelaces. We have these little plastic caps on our shoelaces. When those crack or break, or you just pull them off, you know that we need new shoelaces pretty soon. If you did that with your telomeres, you'd need a new life, because the telomeres relate to more fraying and more dissolution of your DNA, just more problems with your DNA. So this is what they discovered. So what they did, they took a whole group of people around Aspen, Colorado. They took their lab to the side of a mountain to a yoga retreat, and they had people engage in what's called loving kindness meditation. I don't have time to get into the details of it, but it's a beautiful meditation. You can look it up. You're basically extending love and kindness even to people you can't stand. It's really neat. And they had people doing this for a month, and they had another waitlist control group just waiting to get in this. By the way, they had no trouble getting people into this study in Aspen, Colorado to meditate at this yoga retreat for free. So they had them doing this, and they wanted to see whether it would influence telomerase. Would it have an impact on increasing telomerase? They found that it did, as expected. But they found a mediator. A mediator is something that further explains the effects. And in fact, it was fully mediated by, guess what, having a strong purpose. What this is saying then is that the loving kindness meditation, extending love and kindness, peace and freedom from suffering to even your biggest enemy, your greatest enemies, built people's purpose in life. And that building a purpose in life was strongly associated with an increase in telomerase. So just, one more study. Purpose in life influenced by meditative practice directly affects both perceived control and negative emotionality, affecting telomerase activity. This is Barbara Fredrickson at the University of North Carolina. She wanted to study people's eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is having a strong, what she calls a noble purpose that goes beyond simple gratification. What she found, and there are multiple studies now looking at this, found that people with strong eudaimonic purpose have more antibodies. It's also been found to have more antivirals, by the way, and people who are just hedonically focused, just after pleasure. And by the way, even Aristotle said it's fine to have, focus on pleasure. We all love good food, good wine, good vacations, good sex, all those things. But if that's all we are, he writes in Nicomachean Ethics, we're like grazing animals. And we all like to graze, but he's saying there is this bigger eudaimonia, being in touch with your inner daemon. That's the root word of eudaimonia. Daemon was their Greek inner god. But you see the difference here. You also see that pro-inflammatory cell production was less in the eudaimonic purpose group and higher in the hedonic group. This has been found many times. Just looking at morbidity and mortality, and then we'll close out with the mechanisms here. But one of my doctoral students recently did this with in our epidemiology department, looking at survival time. This is up to 70 months in survival time. These are adults 50 and older. And looking at people with strong purpose were more likely to survive than people with the weakest purpose. And it just beautifully stepped up. Now you might be going, oh, well, the people with strong purpose are better educated and they take better care of themselves and all of that. They're more emotionally settled. Well, we controlled for all of these things. This is really the kitchen sink: age, sex, education level, race, ethnicity, marital status, smoking status, going all the way down to cynical hostility, whatever the heck that means, negative affect, optimism. So really controlling for everything. This is the result that came out and published in JAMA. Also finding this, there are now 8 studies showing that at retirement, I don't know if anyone's thinking about retirement around here, but if you are, make sure that you repurpose your life. Because if you cannot repurpose your life over time, you're far more likely to develop Alzheimer's. Now, we have an Alzheimer's drug now, or a couple of them, and it may reduce the risk of Alzheimer's by roughly 3%. It costs about $100,000, and you have to inject this painfully into your thigh. Or you can just have a bigger purpose, and that seems to, well, who knows? We don't know that yet. We don't know if just giving people a purpose pill, enhancing their purpose, really will have this effect. But they try to statistically control it out. So you see where we are in this drug development stage in building this purpose pill? We're not quite at that stage where we have randomized trials and meta-analyses and can say, wow, we're now a drug company that's built a purpose pill. Make sense? We need to. So in terms of intervention, I want to focus on work. Because this is where we spend most of our waking hours. And let's see what time it is. Good. Okay. This will take another 8 minutes or so, and I'm good. So let's say this is a nurse. We ask her, what's your purpose? My purpose is to take care of you. But you pull her into a private room and say, what's your purpose? She may pull out her smartphone and go, here's my real purpose, my daughter, and I'm here for her. Now, by the way, do people have smartphones here? Do you own a smartphone? What is on your smartphone, on the wallpaper? When you open it up, who has a family member? Quite a few. Who has their spouse? No one. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, of course, it's a good spouse. Have your spouse on your smartphone. Who has their dog? Anyone have a dog? Okay. Who has their cat? Okay, fine. We have a cat person. Sorry. Nice. Just your cat? You and your cat? Nice. Your fiance and your cat. Okay. So you might have a work of nature. We actually, look at that. And this is pretty reflective of the United States. Most people have their family on it. But that may be one of the first points that you could learn about a patient. Like imagine your patient comes in and they're going like my dad when he was 70 years old. He found out he had diabetes and the doctor said, you know what, you're going to lose your legs if you don't take better care of yourself because you're overweight and you're sedentary. And he said, I don't care. And the doctor was, wait a second, that's my tool to tell you you'll die or lose your legs. I mean, that's that's what I do. And suddenly I've just been rejected, right? The patient, my dad, said, I don't care. I'm the oldest living Strecher and I don't care if I die anymore because I've had a big life. And so the smart doctor then said, you have some granddaughters who really need you. You could be an amazing mentor. My dad actually, and I've never seen him do this, he started crying in front of the doctor. And he now turned 93 this year. So my dad is, he started taking care of himself. And he did it not to live longer because he didn't care about living longer, but he cared about, his kids. Now, it'd be pretty easy for a clinician just to say, to a resistant patient, what's on your smartphone? Just curious. Oh, here's my granddaughter. Here's my daughter. Here's my wife. Here's something. Okay. Then you use that as a building point to start helping that person. So you could say, okay, she has B goals. She wants to be a great mom. Let's say she's a single mom. She wants to make money. You could build this all out just for her based on, you could build her B goals, her ACT goals. Now, by the way, in our research, what we found is we ask people this question. My organization tries to understand my personal purpose for working on a scale of 1 to 7. So 1 is not at all, 7 is absolutely. If there are 6 or 7, 59% of those people report being highly engaged at work. And this is a scale called the Utrecht Engagement Scale. It's been used for a long time. And this is adjusting for age, gender, race, income, education, organizational role, organizational environment, number of reports to you, 16%. Look at the difference. It wouldn't be hard for managers to say, why do you work here? And a lot of managers go, well, that's kind of personal. Then you are not a manager. I'm sorry. It's very important as a manager to say, I need to understand why you work here because it's different from why you work here. Assuming everyone works for money is ridiculous. It absolutely is not the case. People are willing to take tens of thousands of dollars of less money to take a job they feel has meaning and purpose in it. That's very clearly established. So asking people why they work there, incredibly important. Now, they may work for money, but maybe for their kids' college or other things that are transcending as well. Same question looking at percent intending to remain in the organization, double, really, really big. Let's talk, and then I'll wrap up about purposeful culture. This is a classic story. People didn't know if it was true until I asked Thomas Zurbuchen, who used to be in the School of Engineering here, aerospace engineering. He became the director of research at NASA. I asked him, is this a true story? He said, it is for sure. 1962, John F. Kennedy walks up to a custodian and says, hi, I'm Jack Kennedy. What are you doing? Custodian says, well, Mr. President, I'm helping put a man on the moon. Does everyone on your team feel like they are putting the man on the moon? Does everyone on your team feel part of the medical team? If they don't, see what you can do to make that happen. They'll stay longer. So we look at dignity and belonging. Do I belong in this group? Does my organization support my purpose? Do I feel like my organization has a higher revenue transcending purpose? If you put those things together and you start building an index around that, I don't have time to get into detail about this, but we find far greater work engagement if you are part of a strong culture, a purposeful culture. You are more likely to stay. CEOs think that everybody understands the purpose of their organization. That's just what CEOs do. They just don't talk to other people very often. And if they did, like the president did, or the EVP, they know that not everybody is attached to the purpose the way they think that the CEO thinks they are. We've asked US employees, do you clearly know your company's purpose? 37% say yes. Are you enthusiastic about the purpose of your organization? This is the whole US workforce. 20% say how they could support the purpose. 15% feel enabled to work toward the purpose. 20% fully trust the company that employs them. Is that a good state of the American workforce? Maybe it is, I don't know, but let's pretend that it's a football team. We have 11 players, and of the 11, you're the quarterback, and what you find is that 4 of them on your team in the huddle know which goal they're going to. And 2 of them care. 2 of them know which position they're supposed to be playing. And I know this sounds like the University of Michigan lately. 2 of them believe their efforts could make a difference, and 8 would just as soon be rooting for the other team. Would you accept that? Of course not. You'd fire the coach immediately, right? Well, we don't do that with inept leaders who, they accept that idea that people don't need to be attached to a purpose. So I think about not just one tree and not just the top behaviors. I think about the root system, and I think about what's feeding into the root system. This could be culture. A purposeful culture feeds into that. And if it's a shared culture in an organization, imagine how strong that is. Imagine how strong your family would be if you at a dinner table said, do we have a purpose as a family? Let's move toward the future. Just as I wrap this up for the next minute, let's go to 2050. There will be more and more of this stuff going on, right? There's going to be more and more AI. There's going to be more and more clouds, that help us with medicine. Hopefully, there will be new technologies that will help us find purpose, connection in our lives as well, tools that could help us do things like that. But no matter what, I would say that we're still going to have this tree. We're still, even in 2050, we're still going to need to be thinking about our lives and the root system underneath, what is visible to all of us. Thank you. All right. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Dr. Strecher, that was a phenomenal eye-opening talk. So thank you so much. I'm going to start with a quick question. Are you aware of any healthcare system they systematically measuring this, maybe in clinic or, with?
Well, without getting into the whole conflict of interest issue, I guess I will have to, but we work with quite a number of, Kumanu works with healthcare organizations. So Bay State Health, for example, in Western Massachusetts, we've worked with, and we, have an app. We monitor people's purposes in their lives. We look at emotional self-regulation. We look at purposeful culture, and we monitor it over time. And we have found very significant reductions in depression, significant reductions in people leaving the company as well. Significant improvements in things like engagement. So that's the sort of thing that we're working toward. And I don't want to steer toward any sort of, proprietary issue, but that is simply what we've been finding. And that's what I've been spending a lot of my time on. And there are quite a few healthcare organizations that have been doing this now.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Any questions?
That was super, in fact, inspiring. How do you get alignment between like the mission statement or the purpose of your organization and an individual's mission statement?
Great question. I asked Ari Weinswag that, who is the founder of Zingerman's. And I said, Ari, do you try to get to understand everybody's purpose? He said, no. He said, we have a purpose. It's a very clear mission statement. And when people come in, we say, here's a mission statement, here's a purpose statement. If you buy into this, we're friends and we can hire you. If you don't, there are a lot of other jobs. So he does not spend a lot of time, but I do know other groups who do, just finding out, why do you work here? And that simple question of why do they work seems to be helpful. But for Ari anyway, with respect to the mission statement, he says we hire to the mission statement. We don't try to convince people to align with the mission statement. So, but you know, you still have a lot of employees, and if you're starting a new purpose or mission statement, it's probably important to get some kind of agreement among people around that mission statement. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, good. Thanks for coming.
All right, thank you so much.